projector. Oh, I gotta turn this on. All right, so I originally asked if I could give a presentation on Ember CLI, and then I realized this is not an Ember specific group, it's a JavaScript general. So I am going to do the Ember CLI presentation, but I first thought I'd start with a more basic Ember talk. So one of the most core parts in Ember is a class called Ember Object. And I'm going to go over kind of beginner level up to more advanced Ember Object stuff. And if you can get a good handle on the Ember Object class, you're going to have a good handle on most of what Ember is doing under the hood. So what we're going to cover in this presentation is creating or instantiating, getting setting on the object, what I call the xProperty methods, extending, reopening, inheritance, computed properties, observers, and events, the last three. I won't go too super. When creating a Ember object or a instance of an Ember object class, we're going to use the create method off of the class itself. And I know for people that are doing JavaScript for a while, classes don't exist in prototype land, but here the concept of a class has meaning within Ember itself. Instead of doing new and then the type, the create function will actually do some additional stuff under the hood. It does call new, it does instantiate, but there's some other lifecycle hooks that actually runs internally. So it's all encapsulated with the create function. One of which is init. So up here, init. Init is actually just the initialize function. So after your object instantiates, this function is kicked off automatically, and it demonstrates that by logging out to the console. So down here we do person.create, and we can see that created person is logged out in the console. Getting and setting in an object. So instead of doing like person.name equals this and person.name in order to set and get on the object, we're going to use actual set and get methods. If you've done Backbone before, this should look somewhat familiar. The reason for that is internally, Ember is doing some additional stuff beyond just setting the value and getting the value, especially when you start getting to longer path names. So here we just see a simple demonstration, setting the name to a value, and then I'm getting it. Oh, arrows. So we can also get many. And to do that, we pass in a indeterminate number of arguments. So all the arguments that we pass in is going to return back a JSON object of the key values that we asked for. So get with default. This could be a common pattern that you see sometimes. I don't know why it's sticky. You may try to get a particular property off of the object, and if that property doesn't have a value yet you want to return a default value instead. So you may guard against that with the OR symbol. Ember has this get with default function you can use instead, so you pass the property name, and then the second argument is going to be the default value. You can do mass assignment as well. So just like get properties, you have set properties. And inside here, you're going to pass the object that's going to contain all the keys and values that you want to set. So if you have many things you want to do at once, or if you have a payload object or something like that, you can just pass it into set properties. Excuse me. So here, passing in name Brian, age 34, and we see down below that those values are set properly. If you want, you can actually pass in a more complex object. Rather than just a flat one-dimensional object, you can pass in an object that has indeterminate depth. So if we pass in this object here, profile, and the profile has its own object with a title property in it. In order to get that down below, we actually pass in this string path. So the convention in Ember is that we do the path that's going to link to the keys, and each segment is separated by a period. So just to demonstrate that here, profile links to profile on the segment, title links to title, and then we have the period separation. So this is referred to as the path when you're actually getting off of Ember. And you can set on paths as well. But in this case, we are trying to set on a property path where one of the parent segments does not yet exist. So we see here that we're trying to do profile.title, and it doesn't actually get to this second one. You see this error first. I may have truncated that a little bit for the sake of this, but it'll just say property failed to set because the profile could not be found or was destroyed. Get around this, you can set profile to a default object, and now we can properly do profile.title and set that, and then the object that profile is pointing to will set a title property on it. Errors. So if you try to get a property off of an object that doesn't yet exist, by default an instance of Ember object will return undefined because it doesn't exist yet. However, we can handle that case if we'd like. So this is where the get comes in useful. Whereas if we just did person.name, it would just return that property directly on that object. But when we're using get, internally, Ember will say, does this have a value? If not, let's delegate to the unknown property function. So in this case, unknown property, if we now try to get the name, it doesn't exist yet, it calls unknown property, and then it passes in the path as the key name into this function. Here I overrode it, and I'm just returning console.log and saying the name, so we see that printed out right here. Second pass around, I set the name to a value, and then I get it, and unknown property is not called this time, it just outputs the value. Likewise, to getting unknown properties, we can set unknown properties. So in this case, we're setting name to a value and we're getting it, but name did not previously have a value. So here, I try to set name. It does not previously have a value. Ember object will say, okay, we're trying to set this value. We're trying to set this property to a value. It does not currently have a value. Let's delegate to set unknown property, and it takes two arguments: the key name and the value that you're now trying to set. So now we log out to the console just for my demonstration purposes, and we see that it calls this function. If you wanted to handle set unknown property for a given object, but you wanted to ignore certain properties, you may get around that by doing something like this, where we try to set name, but because we set it to a default value up here in the extending, set unknown property is never called. And then it works as we normally expect. So xProperty methods. xProperty methods is not the official name, it's just what I refer to, a group of functions that have something called something property, like increment property or toggle property. So this is a common pattern. You may have like an admin board where you're toggling people's roles, and like this is an admin, this is not an admin, just on off. So here we're just checking to see if the flag is set. If it is, we set it to false. If it isn't, we set it to true. Instead, we can use the toggle property method on the property. The difference here is that it will actually what this will do internally is that it will always take a truthy value and then set that to false. It'll always take a falsy value and set it to true. So in JavaScript, a truthy value. So we'll start with the other side. A falsy value is 0, undefined, null, false. I think those are the only ones. Everything else is considered to be true. So this will just flip that bit. Oh, errors. Increment. So here we have a situation where I have a counter and I'm looking to increment that counter by 1. So I get the original value of the counter and I just add 1 to it. However, what if my counter doesn't have any pre-existing value? If I try to add 1 to it, it's going to reply with not a number. So down here I may guard against that, say give me the value of counter, or it's 0, default to 0. You could also use get with default from previously, and then we just increment it by 1. Instead, you can use increment property. Increment property will do all that logic for you internally, and it will just increment the property by 1. Or you can pass in an optional argument. So if my previous value is 4, I pass in an argument of 10. It's now going to give me a resulting value of 14. The opposite of this is decrement property. So in this case, I started with 4, subtracting 10, get -6. Can't math. And then if I don't pass an argument to it, it's going to default by decrementing by 1. So now we're getting into class inheritance and a little bit more advanced topics. So here we have the Ember object, and when we call extend, this is going to allow us to actually extend this object into a new, what we consider to be a class. And in Ember, at least with the constant global variable conventions, we will use this camel-cased convention for a class. So if this was a dog person, it would be capital D, capital P. Though the conventions doesn't actually have any effect upon your code in any way. Actually, it might. I think it would. Yeah, it does. So you have to use the camel-cased convention if you're using regular Ember. What I'm going to be showing later on with Ember CLI, that's a different case. So here, every trait that is an Ember object will be copied over into the person class. And person class's superclass will be considered to be Ember object, or whatever class it inherited from. And now we can create off of this as we normally would with Ember object. We can define custom functions for our new class. So we do that at the point of extension. So up here this is part where I actually forget where I put all my arrows, so I may jump ahead just to find out where my arrows are. Down here, I'm calling person.say, and actually we'll call this function right here. So any functions you define within extend are considered to be instance functions to be called on the instance and on the class. If we have a person class right here, and then we are creating a player class that extends off of the person class, player will properly inherit its parent's traits as well. So down here, we're creating a new player instance, and then we call player.say, but the say function was defined in the person class and not the player class. But because we're extending person into player, it inherits those traits. Default value, I showed you a simple example from before. We can do that by passing the value in right there, or we can do it at point of creation. So if we're creating a new instance, we can pass it a JSON object with default values. Mixins are a way of extracting out common traits into a mixin to be passed around into different classes. So here there is a ember.mixin class, and this will actually create an instance of a mixin. And inside here we just pass the JSON object, and this can have key values, functions, properties, whatever you want to do. And then we will actually mix it into our Ember object with the extend function. And then when we create it, we call the name here, we see that it actually properly gives us the value that we defined up in our mixin. We can use multiple mixins, and they're considered to be race condition. There's race conditions. So the last mixin that was mixed into your object, if there are collisions on the property or function that you're calling, the last one that defined it is the one that wins. So here we have the first mixin defining a name property, and the second, this little JSON object we're extending into our class, also defining name. But when we actually get the name off the person, we can see that it used the second one and not the first one. We don't have to pass in just a JSON object as the last one. We can define multiple mixins and then keep passing those in as many as we like. So we have name mixin and new name mixin, and we pass in both right here, and we get the same result from before because the name of Stephanie was defined second. Yeah, sorry, it was passed in second. This is a weird slide. I'm not sure what that slide was, sorry. Oh, I know it was. Okay, so what we notice here with these other, when we're talking about mixins and extending into our objects, what you may have noticed is that the JSON object itself can just be treated as a mixin. And so what is the difference between a mixin, specifically the mixin class, and the JSON object? The other thing I can tell you is that the mixin class actually has some additional functionality beyond just being a regular JSON object. You could just have your JSON object and pass that around your app and use that as your mixin as well. but there are certain lifecycle hooks that are part of the Mixin, the Mixin class that you may want to get benefit from. So whereas previously, if I showed where if you extend the class, you can add additional instance traits to it, traits on the instance. But what if you wanted to add traits to the class itself? We can do that by reopening the class. So here we call reopen class on the person class, and we are redefining the toString function. So toString is not an Ember function, it's a regular JavaScript function. If you call like number.toString, it will give a string representation of it. And Ember uses toString internally to actually display the class names throughout the application. So if you were to inspect like a person model or something like that, it will give you like, let's say person and then the Ember GUID along with it, similar to like this right here. But if you define a function, if you define a model class outside of something like Ember CLI, Ember won't know what the actual name of the class is. And that's because in JavaScript there's no reflection. So even if we assign a class to a given variable, JavaScript can't say like, we know that we're assigned to the person variable and so we must be the person class. So to get around that, we could define our own toString and we can just return explicitly what the class name is right there. Oh. So what we see is that up here, I call person toString, says unknown Mixin, and if we create an instance, it gives us the instance representation of that. It actually refers back to the parent, to its parent class toString, and then gives the Ember GUID right there. But if we now define the toString to return person, we can see down here that it's properly outputting something that looks more reasonable to us or easier to see. Subclassing. So we saw an example of this earlier with the person and the player. Actually, I'm not sure what I was doing with that one right there. Sorry. Mixins. Let's say we have this same Mixin right here, and oops, actually, you know what? I think these two. Sorry about that. I think these two are out of order. I think they're supposed to be earlier. Let's just move on to this one right here. Okay, so because this is part of the entire inheritance stuff. Super. If you've done a language like Ruby or Smalltalk, I think Python has something like this similar, but you're used to actually being able to call up the inheritance chain. So if you have a parent class that you inherited from and you redefine a function, you can refer back to that parent's function by calling super. And this concept doesn't really exist in JavaScript, but they got around it by being able to call up the prototype chain, and they defined a function called underscore super. So here we have player.say, and we created a player class and extended off of person. So player.say will first call this say function that's defined in the player class, but inside that function we're calling super. And so now that will appropriately call its parent's class of the same name. Sorry, it's the similarly named function on the parent class. So we can use this to create some interesting strategies and patterns around our code base for creating very clean code. So if you have a parent class that has a very complex functionality in it, and you need to modify that in some way or mutate its result, you won't have to copy the function wholesale and just change what you want. You can call the parent's function, get the result of that, and then mutate the value. In this case, I'm just using it to log out to the console. It will also work for Mixins. So instead of having a class that we're inheriting from for player, we have player is saying hello. It calls the say function that's defined in the player class. In this case, if you notice here, we have the say mixin that is mixed into our class prior to this JSON object right here. And now when we call super, it will actually call the mixin that was defined before this. Sorry, the similarly named function for the mixin that was defined before this. Computer properties, or also known as CPs. If you're in the Ember IRC channel and you see acronyms, that's what that means. Well, if you're in the Ember channel right now, there's a lot of QP being thrown around. That's query params. There needs to be a glossary. So computer properties, this is one of the more earlier selling points for Ember. I think they're pretty cool, but if you've looked into Ember at all, this is probably one of the first things you run across. So there's a difference between what a function, a pure function is referred to, and what a computer property is, or what a property is. So in this case, if we have this full name function here, and we get the full name property, it will just return the actual function. So it'll be like if we just called person.fullname on it. If you're in your console, you've ever done that, you'd see it just outputs like the string representation of a function. However, if we do this screwy little .property thing on the function declaration itself, this tells Ember that this function is now considered to be a property, and we will execute this function and return the result. This here is mutating so if you're not familiar with functions in JavaScript or like the concept of them, they're just considered to be objects as well. There's a function class. And so this is legitimate JavaScript, but it may look a little odd to you. At DockYard, we've actually stopped writing this style right here. I should probably update these slides. We use a different style. We use ember.computed, and then we will, this right here actually just delegates to ember.computed. It's just shorthand for it. But we've stopped doing this, so we will use the explicit longhand version of it. But I think every single guide out there uses this form in it. So it's debatable which one is correct or which one's preferred. Anyway, if we declare this as a property function, Ember will now say we get it full name. Now we get the value off of it. The other really nice thing about computer properties is it actually caches the value. So if we call the computer property multiple times, and assuming that Ember doesn't think that any of the dependent keys for a property have changed, then Ember will not rerun the computer property. It will just give us back the value. So if we have a very expensive function that we're running, something that is crunching a bunch of numbers, or I don't know, maybe processing an image, we don't want to do that twice if there's no reason to do it twice. We can tell Ember which properties are related to this computer property by passing in an indeterminate number of arguments. So in this case, I'm giving it first name, last name, because those are the properties that are going to make up what the full name is. And so, and then up here, to indicate when the function actually runs, I have a console log running. So down here we see person.get full name, and we notice that, oh, it logged out to the console running, and then we get the value of the full name. The second time we get it, though, we haven't changed any of the dependent properties. We notice that the running console log did not get output. So this shows that it's just returning the value directly. So handling the caching very, very simply. It's nice to have. But if we modify one of the dependent properties, then we notice that the second time we get it, it's going to actually run the function again, and we see the console log. So observers, where observers are run lazily. So you have to actually, with observers, they will be kicked off automatically. Computer properties are run eagerly, meaning that we have to tell Ember that we want it to run. This could be done in a template. So if we have a property that's in our template that binds the value, so that will automatically update, but still it will get the property. Ember will detect that something's changed, it will get the property, and then it'll rerun it. Whereas observers, when we make a change to something that the observer is watching, it will just kick it off automatically. So here we can pass in any indeterminate number of arguments or properties to observe. And when we set it this time, you'll notice that the console log, it logs out the console automatically. And the difference here between that computer property again is when I set here, the function was not run. The function was only run when I got the property. This is just showing multiple observers, so first name, last name. In this case, what's going on with the buttons? This case, we set the first name, and then we see it long run, and we set the last name, we see it run. Events. One of the earliest slides I showed was the init function, in that when we instantiate our Ember object class, the init function is automatically kicked off. We've been shying away from overriding that function, just because there could be something in the parent class that uses init, and then you have to call super, and we forget to call super. Things blow up. So instead, we can actually assign multiple event functions to run on a lifecycle hook, or when a particular event is triggered. The only lifecycle hook in an Ember object is init, but more complex objects that inherit from Ember object have different ones. Ember data has quite a few. So we can do that with .on, and then we just pass in the event we want to watch. And so when I create the person, it actually logs out the console. So I'm just going to come back here for a second, just because I'll easier to put a link. But the reason why I think learning Ember object is very, very important is because of the amount of impact and the amount of things it touches in an Ember application. So with Ember object, there are 57 classes in total that inherit from Ember object, either directly or indirectly. That's actually more now with Ember 1.6. I think it's like 59. 24 direct descendants, 34 indirect, and there's 23 Ember data descendant classes. So I can visualize that for you. Being redirected. So this is actually a live generated object tree I built using D3, and it actually just recursively goes through all the classes and builds out the relationships and the inheritance between the classes. So here we can see Ember object at the top and all these classes inside Ember that eventually derive from Ember object. And if we turn on private classes, we get a few more. If we turn on Ember data, we get a lot more. So having a strong understanding on, so that's 59 right there, that's 151. Having a strong understanding of how Ember data works, how Ember object works, is going to help you understand Ember data, it's going to help you understand routers, it's going to help you understand a lot of stuff that Ember itself is built upon. So that's it for Ember object. Is there any Ember object questions or anything? Yes.
I have a question about the call chain between Mixins and inheritance, and what the order is between that.
Let me go. Oh, not on my slides. Can you do Command Tab just to bring it back? Oops. No. Actually, you know what? I think it's on that.
So, I mean, which object would be the one that would call super?
When you call super, are Mixins called before parent classes?
No. So if you were to are you getting at if player inherited from a person class and then that had to say function? Is that what you're getting at? But this extended, it had a Mixin here.
Right. Yeah.
So I think the way it would go is that it would call this say first, it would then call the Mixin say, and then it would call the parent class say.
Okay.
So I think that's the chaining order.
Okay. Cool.
Anything else, Ember object? Okay. So we will move on to Ember CLI. I expect everyone to be Ember experts. So I'm going to mix this with, this is less slides, it's around 25 or 30. And then I'll do some live coding. We'll step through an application. We'll generate an app, assuming npm will allow me to install everything. You can skip that. All right, so I'm going to go over ES6 modules, Broccoli, ember-app-kit, more on the resolver side of ember-app-kit, what that really means, Ember CLI, and then we'll TDD something. This is installing the other ones. All right, so ES6 modules. I think I did highlighting for this one. So here we have what I call the constant class declaration, or the global constant class declaration, and a regular like the official Ember way you're doing it right now, if you were to download the starter kit off ember.com, ember.js.com, you would put everything on your global namespace. So, which in most cases for people will just be app or whatever you actually created your Ember application with. The problem with this is that now you have potential conflicts between certain naming. For example, I had a problem with Ember Data. So Ember Data expects to have a store class on namespace, which means that I was building an application for a client that had stores, and I could not use store as a model name because they conflicted. So I had to actually use a serializer from the back. I had no control over the back end, so when the data was coming across, I had to rename all stores to shops, and just was a big pain in the ass. So this is a problem in Ember, and the way that they're getting around it is by moving over to ES6 modules. We've never heard of ES6 modules before. Okay, all right, so ES6 is ECMAScript 6. ECMAScript is the spec that JavaScript is built upon. Most browsers are currently on ECMAScript 5, although some of them have started to implement ES6 features like promises. Modules are a feature of ES6. They're going to allow you to encapsulate, I guess, certain pieces of code and avoid the global namespacing issue. So the syntax for that, here we see this export default, and then whatever comes after this, whatever the next value is that comes after this, gets exported as a module. So the value that comes after this is this entire Ember object right here. So syntactically, not syntactically, but value-wise, this is the same as assigning it to this value, because this entire Ember object thing is assigned to that person variable. But instead, we're exporting the default here. Alternate way to write this is to because the ES6 modules will actually be encapsulated, these will be all considered to be local, and then the export will be exported on the global export object. So we can assign to a local variable inside our ES6 module, and then down here export that, and that functionally works the same as doing this right here. Currently, if you want to use ES6 modules, you have to use what is called an ES6 module transpiler. Square has one. In fact, I think Square has the only one. It will take syntax like this, which is not valid ECMAScript 5, and it will convert it to something that looks really screwy. I didn't paste it in here, but it will be this code right here wrapped with basically some other stuff to inject it into a, I don't know what you want to call it, like a container or just like a regular hash to be looked up. And then in order to access these objects, you'll have to use a library like require.js. There are two formats to compile into. There's AMD, which stands for asynchronous module definition, which seems to be favored by the Ember people. And then there's common.js, which seems to be favored by the Node people. So this is all to get around the fact that ES6 modules are good in the sense that it allows us to get around the global namespacing issue, but they are not yet available for the browser, so we transpile. And transpile is just a fancy word for taking one type of source code and converting to another. So if you use CoffeeScript, you're transpiling from CoffeeScript to JavaScript. In this case, we're transpiling from ES6 modules into either AMD or common.js. So require JS and all of there's another one, I forget the name of the other one, but they will most likely have just this required method that gets defined on the window, and then you give it the path to your module, and then it will return the value that you assign to that path. However, in Ember CLI, we're going to have paths more similar to this. So we have this my-app modules person, because we have a project directory structure, and we're putting a, let's say, the person model inside the models directory that's under our general app directory, which is part of our project. So same thing with a controller, same thing with a view, same thing with a route. So if we have a person controller, we're going to put it under app controllers person.js. Whoops. I have more, when we get to the resolver in a few slides, this will kind of flush out a little bit. So Broccoli. Broccoli is a build tool built by Joe Liss. I think it came out of frustration with Grunt. If you have built any complex JavaScript applications with Grunt, you've definitely felt the pain of how slow it can be. And I think that's not so much a like Grunt trashing, just that Grunt was not necessarily meant to be a build tool. It was meant to be a task runner. And so it seemed like all this additional responsibility was given to it, and this wasn't the original intent of it. At least that's my understanding. So the goal of Broccoli is to have extremely fast build times. And another project goal of Broccoli is extremely small surface API. Joe spoke with some of the Grunt developers and I think some other build tool developers. They all stressed upon her that when the community starts building plugins for your tool, then you're going to run into the problem that you're not going to be able to change the API as much as you'd like. Especially if it's a very complex API, because now it has this very wide surface and everyone is depending upon a different piece of that surface. So in order to keep the project as nimble as possible, she went for extremely small surface API. The Broccoli project itself is almost nothing in terms of what it does. And then everything that Broccoli gives you is really in the entire plugin ecosystem. So this gives Joe the ability to quickly update and make changes to Broccoli without really I guess ticking off the plugin authors too often. And there's plenty of plugins. It's still pre 1.0 though, so pretty much everything I'm going to be talking about right now is pre 1.0. If you're working at a company that is very adamant about 1.0 software, you're probably going to have to wait a while to get the benefits of Broccoli and Ember CLI. It's still being vetted. Some things in this slide deck will probably change in the next month. They may change before I finish talking. We don't know. Ember-app-kit. So this was a project that was essentially extracted out of Yap. Stefan Penner is he is a Ember.js core team member and developer at Yap. I think I put it too many F's for his name. It gives a Rails, if you've ever done a Ruby on Rails development, a Ruby on Rails like project structure. So you're going to have an app directory, a models directory, a controllers directory, and stuff. It was using Grunt as the build tool, and it was the first Ember build tool to push in the direction of ES6 modularizing, I guess, Ember. So internally in Ember, when you refer to another model or you refer to a controller, or when Ember is trying to look up a controller, it will actually try to resolve that name. It does this internally by not using globals. It does it internally by not using the ES6 pass. It does it internally by using, it's really difficult to see, but a path that looks like this. So you'll have myapp at model : person. And this is a path in order to resolve the person model. Myapp at model : person. Oops. I think I'm missing a slide. All right, so what this will come out to basically is that myapp is the namespace for your application, and when you generate a ember-app-kit project or an Ember CLI project, your project will be designated with a namespace. And then model is just, I guess, the type of thing you want to look up, and then person is the class. So internally, Ember will use its resolver to find where this file actually exists. And with Ember-app-kit, I think I put router. Router is the wrong word. It's supposed to be resolver. With Ember-app-kit, it has its own resolver that's meant specifically for ES6 modules. So, but the shortcomings of Ember-app-kit was that it was basically a GitHub project that you have to clone and then go from there. You would have to use Grunt. So they decided eventually to move over to this concept of Ember CLI. They wanted to have an experience where I could just sit down at a terminal and type Ember new project name, and they get a whole new Ember project and be up and running on an Ember project within like 10 seconds. So we get all the ES6 and resolving stuff from Ember-app-kit, which was really good, and it really proved that that stuff is useful and helpful. We get the Broccoli build system inside Ember CLI, project generation, server and backend proxy. So Ember CLI will, during development, you run Ember server and it'll actually serve up all your files on port 4200, rather than compiling your files into a single like app.js file and then copying this over to another project that is being served up like a Rails project or a Node project. You're just going to serve this up directly, and you're going to connect directly to port 4200. If you have a backend that you are developing against, you can use the backend proxy option. So you do -- proxy and then give it the URL to that backend. And then any request that the Ember CLI server cannot respond with, it will delegate that request to the proxy server. There's a test suite in it as well. Early on, Ember got, and deservedly so, knocked around pretty good in terms of reputation for not being very heavy on at least developer testing. Like Ember itself was very well tested, but there was very low conventions around actually testing your application and TDDing it. So Ember CLI will get a test suite up for you and running pretty quickly. It's another feature which I like it sometimes, I don't like it other times. Live reloading. So if you are working on a file, the way Ember works is the URL is important. Like if you're on a given URL and I share this URL with you, you should be able to see exactly what I'm seeing. So that's the concept. Live reloading, if I'm on a given URL on my application that I'm developing, and I go in and change a file, the live reload will automatically reload my application for me before I even get back to it, so I should see the new changes automatically. If you're using an editor that creates temp files or any type of temporary files or swap files inside your project structure, you're going to have a bad time, because the live reloading actually does not care if it is a JavaScript file or a swap file or a temp file or an image file. It'll just reload on any change. And so if you use Vim, Vim creates a new swap file on every single file that you open, and that can be really annoying. If you're using Vim though, you can actually change Vim to store those temporary and swap files elsewhere, which I highly recommend. If you're using another editor, I'm not too familiar with changing the swap file locations. It's probably possible. But I think that this is a shortcoming of Broccoli. The live reloading is for Broccoli, or rather it's a plugin. I think this is a shortcoming of that plugin and not so much of people's editors. But again, pre 1.0 software, so it's not high on the priority list for them to tackle right now. And everything is accessible through the Ember command line. There's actually a suite of generators beyond the project generator that are being worked on. They're actually being rewritten. I was going to show them tonight, but they weren't working because they're being rewritten. But you'll be able to do like Ember generate model, and then get your model files generated automatically, and then test files for that as well. And again, still pre 1.0. So to get up and running, you do npm install -g, there's a little dash right there, ember-CLI. What you'll get for you generated automatically is structure similar to this. So you'll have an app directory config, public tests, vendor directory, and then bower.js file, proc file, and package.json. So Ember CLI applications currently require you to do bower install and npm install. The convention right now is that the node modules are meant for backend concerns, so Ember server concerns. And then the bower.js files are where your front-end concerns are going to be. So if you have like moment.js or something like that and you want to install it, you would do that with bower. However, and I apologize if anyone here loves bower, but bower fucking sucks. And they are supposedly pulling that out in favor of everything on npm. Procfile is the configuration file for Broccoli. And I'm not going to go too deep into this today. I may show when I start live coding. I'll go into it for a moment, but if you're going to become an effective Ember CLI developer, then you should have a good understanding on Broccoli and how it works. Inside the app directory, you're going to get all these directories and files right here: components, controllers, helpers, initializers, mixing models, route styles, templates, utils, views, app.js, index.html, index.html, and router.js. So notice styles. You will be putting your style sheets inside here. Ember CLI will compile Sass, less with the right plugins. It's actually just Broccoli plugins. Or if you don't want to do that, there is a public directory. I don't think others. Okay, so you can stick like just a style sheet in there if you don't feel like having it compiled. The style sheets will be pulled into the build system. They just won't be compiled in the normal way if you have like I guess transpiled style sheet. The index.html file is the file that gets loaded up when you access port 4200. And then app.js file is the main application file. The config directory will just have one file, environment.js. Ember CLI applications have two environments, a development environment and a production environment. And when you test your application, it's being run in the development environment. I'm hoping that will change in the future because I definitely have test-specific concerns that I don't think should be compiled into my development environment. But for right now, it's development and production. So if you have, let's say, certain values for configuration settings or something like that that need to be pulled into production specifically, then you can do that. You can do that inside this file. Inside the test directory, you're going to get its own special test resolver. And then start app is going to be used quite a bit in your tests for your integration tests. Index.html is the test suite file. So when you load up port 4200, you go to /tests. It'll load up that index.html, and it's just a QUnit test suite. And then these are not super. You can put extra helpers in here, and this just loads up your test suite. Oh, I've got it. Okay. Before I do live coding, any questions on anything I've talked about so far? Yes.
So there was a vendors directory.
Oh, okay, yeah. So when you do Bower install, it will compile it will install into the vendor directory. So you'll have everything for you locally. But I believe that the Ember CLI project generator will actually ignore that directory, so it's not checked into source control.
Okay. And that's versus the regular Bower components directory.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, I didn't include that here. Yep.
Okay.
Anything else? Yes.
You mentioned you want to run a node backend within this. Where in the app directory does that fall?
It's a good question. It doesn't fall anywhere. So I can show you a project structure that we've been using at DockYard. Actually, I'll just go over it now. What we'll do is we will have a top-level directory, and that will, if we're in control of the backend and the front end, we'll have a top-level project directory, and then inside there, we will generate our Ember application, and we will rename it to just Ember, the directory itself. Because when we generate the project, we still have to use the right project name, especially in, I think it's in package JSON. That project name is used for the application namespace. And then we use Rails, but it would be the same thing for Node. We generate the Rails project in there as well, and we rename that to backend. And then from there, we now have two, like our backend and front end directories underneath our normal project directory structure. You can probably, we don't build Node applications, so you can probably do the exact same conventions. As far as deployment goes, there are several options. You can have a task runner on the top level project directory that will compile out to your backend server inside the public directory, the index.html file, and then the app.js file and the app.css file. If you want to do that, or something that we do, we deploy to Heroku quite a bit, and with Heroku, we can't push because we keep the back and the front end under the same GitHub, same Git repo. So if we were to push that repo as is to GitHub, GitHub that has no idea what it is, because it looks at the root directory and says, is this a Rails app? Is this a Node app? Is this a Go app? So what we'll do is we will have a task that will actually, are you familiar with Git subtrees? So a Git subtree, for those that don't know, is a separate branch that we can actually rewrite the entire structure of our Git repo, and we will push to that. We will compile to our backend application in the Git subtree, and then move that to the top level directory, and then we will push the Git subtree to Heroku. And so when Heroku sees it, it sees the Git repo being pushed and just sees the root directory and like, oh, this is a Rails application. We know how to compile this. And what's nice about Ember CLI now, if you've ever done Rails applications, you push to Heroku. Worst part is waiting for Sprockets to compile everything. So now we can avoid that whole step because all of our assets are already pre-compiled before we can push it. Does that get you? Okay.
I think so. How do you deal, well, I guess there you're always dealing with local paths, so you don't need to deal with like setting in your production environment URLs and things like that.
So inside environment.js, you can handle all that stuff. So there's literally, I can show it when I jump up there, there's like an if statement, like if development, if production.
Okay, so when you compile it into your backend, you're compiling it in the production environment there.
Oh, I see what you're saying. If we are compiling on Heroku, say we have like some environment variables specifically on that server that we want to include in. I don't know the answer to that question.
Just config stuff in your backend.
Was that?
Or even just stuff that's configured in your backend.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a way to do it. We have not really run into that situation because most of our production-specific environment settings really have our backend concerns, like our mail server and Redis server and stuff like that.
Good question.
Yep.
What about fingerprinting? Have you guys done anything about that?
No, well, that's a big.
That's okay.
I know that's it. So that's a good thing to bring up. For those that aren't familiar with the term fingerprinting, is basically cache busting. So when you have a file that is being served up by your backend server, if it's just like app.js, the second time you try to access it, your browser may serve up your local copy instead of the original copy. And so there's a way around that. You can do inside your index file. When you look up the source of it, you do app.js question mark and then some sort of unique number. And so as long as this number will usually represent like the state of the file, either a timestamp or like MD5 hash or something like that. So if the file changed, that number changes. And so the next time someone goes and reloads the page, then the browser says, oh, this URL is unique, so we should access or pull down this brand new file.